when she's sitting there saying that she did these things because she loved him and that she knew that he would enjoy that, and that she didn't specifically tell him that she didn't want to do those things, that is hitting at the heart of the prosecution's case and proving knowing. I think one of the difficulties that we have as lawyers looking at this case is it doesn't fit the traditional model of sex trafficking and an organized criminal activity for these very reasons. If you go to page 6 of their indictment, just last point on this issue, it says under the pretense of a romantic relationship. There isn't a pretense here. This was in fact a romantic relationship. You may not agree with it. It may have been twisted and perverted, but this is why a lot of lawyers are looking at this case and say, it's like they're putting a square peg in a round hole here.
And Bob, how much does kind of the psychology of a potentially abusive relationship play into all this? Because to your point, when they're kind of going through all of this, this was a romantic relationship, et cetera, but just the idea of somebody who's been abused being afraid to say no, or kind of not wanting, kind of being dependent on the other person. How much does that play into it?
You know, a lot of us trial lawyers are talking about this very point. It's a great question. It's a prescient question. It's a cutting edge question here in the law. Lots of times in relationships, people feel pressured, whether right or wrong, for one reason or the other. What the prosecution is trying to show here is that this pressure and this coercion went to a place where the acts were no longer consensual, but rather being coerced. That's what the prosecutor wants to show. The defense, on the other hand, is going to say, you know what? They didn't have a problem taking the money. By the way, this isn't my personal opinion, but this is what they're going to say. They didn't have a problem taking the money. They didn't have a problem with the fanfare. They didn't have a problem with the proximity to power and getting things from him. They only had a problem when it ended. And when they wanted to leave that relationship, they were allowed to leave that relationship. This was a consensual activity, and essentially it's buyer's remorse. They didn't like what happened afterwards, but that's not a crime.
If you're his attorney, how do you prep your client ahead of court after being essentially reprimanded by the judge?
Yeah, this is really hard, and I'm very uncomfortable with this. I understand what the court is trying to do, but it's very difficult. I've had cases where literally, on a number of cases, where the jurors have made a complaint by the way the defendant is acting in front of them, which is not evidence in the case, but nevertheless, the jury's there watching the defendant. I've heard things like, he looks antiseptic, or he's staring at me and I'm uncomfortable. So the judge sitting there saying, I don't want you to be emotive. I understand that, because in a sense, what he's doing is communicating to the jury. But by the same token, I try to tell a client, just act yourself, but don't do anything that's going to make you look bad in front of the jury.